focusing on.
Sorry, what's that? We haven't. Sorry.
That's wow. It's science, right? It's science. Focusing on.
1 second. Sorry. We're having technical issues, and we had no audio for a moment there. So
Oh.
see if I can fix that.
Now we have extra audio.
Yeah, now we have extra audio. So sorry. We're trying to modify this. Give me just a moment. I'm so sorry.
It's okay. That's why this is a dry run.
That's right.
So you can all read the participants, and I'll slowly move on to the next slide.
We got a little bit of echo going.
It sounds cool.
That's right. So we're picking up all from here. For her.
And the other nice.
Things if you mute it, unmute it, it's gonna echo again. Tell you what, okay. 1 second. Easy fix. Hang with us there, guys. Sorry about that.
This is why we have Daniel and Kent with us today.
Okay. So now let's get back into your presentation. What is it? Okay, I think you're good.
Now?
I think
You're
you're good.
good? Do we have audio?
Let me fix this one thing. Yeah, go ahead. You can go ahead.
Okay, good. So as you can see, we crossed band 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. Great. Okay. So we had several pieces of data that we collected, primarily their lesson plans and their reflections on their instructional decisions. And then our third piece at the end of the course, that we have a series of questions that they respond to kind of assess their dispositions in terms of integrating language instruction, so a broader perspective. We spent a lot of time coding data with our undergraduate students. I think if I had to highlight one big piece of learning, it was walking them through that coding process, having multiple people look at the same piece of data to see where our codes merged and where we were on track together and where we diverged and how we reached consensus. So that part of the research process was extremely valuable and extremely productive. And it was great, and speaking for Amanda a little bit too, to have the undergraduate perspective as students in that class as we're looking at that data and looking at those patterns. Awesome, thank you. Excuse me. So we really focused on basing our codes, looking at academic language and their rationales. Okay, that was our coding structures. So we have two findings that emerged from that. Finding number one is they really started with a content first approach. They looked at the content, they looked at the language that was embedded in that content, and then they chose language structures to support the teaching of the content. But that was really and truly the process that they took, was a content first approach. And they were great lessons. But our second finding indicates that the middle school students with whom they were working in science classrooms were at times perplexed. Even though some of these language integration moments of instruction were very brief, that they were kind of complex about why they were doing language arts in science class. All right, so I'll talk a little bit about our first finding and then I'll pass it to Amanda for our second. So Dory very briefly focused on morphemes and vocabulary, finding words that were similar, looking at words like conduct, conductor, conduction, differentiating between the term conductor in science versus conductor that leads an orchestra. So really broadening students' understanding of morphemes and terminology. I know there's a lot of words here, but I really wanted to leave Frank's language that he used in his reflection, as well as give you a sense of what his unit covered. So his unit was really cool because he tied the concept of how we classify words and find patterns in words to how we classify organisms in science. So he made connections between the linguistic act of classifying and the way that scientists classify. So he multicellular, unicellular, used the word taxonomy, and focused on bi and nome, so as the two-part naming system in science, and had students do some mixing and matching and playing with morphemes up on the board as part of a center in a unit. So this little activity, although it integrated language, was 10 minutes in this whole instructional period as part of a center. It was one brief moment of instruction. Liz differed from Dory and Frank in that she didn't focus on vocabulary. She really utilized, she was working with Newton's laws of motion, and she was having her students compare and contrast the different laws, as well as work on the language of cause and effect in terms of Newton's laws of motion. So the first day, she provided a standard for her classroom context lecture, where she's providing students notes, they're taking down information, and at the end, she gives them some kind of sentence frames, closed sentences, for students to demonstrate their understanding of those concepts. She included terms like whereas or on the other hand, some of those phrases that we use to show comparison and contrast across concepts as her closure. And then the following day, she integrated the same structure of the sentence frames into a station. Okay, but it wasn't compare and contrast, it was cause and effect, and really highlighting those phrases that demonstrate and show cause and effect as they related to those scientific laws. Okay. Great. Do you want to take a moment?
I can. All right, so what do I do? Just stand up there?
Just stand up there and click.
Okay. Our second finding relates to how our teacher candidates, middle school students out in the classroom, interpreted and reacted to their integration of language and science. And how this jumped out at us is Liz had in one of her reflections that she was doing this cause and effect activity with Newton's laws of motions, and one of the students said, "Why are we doing language arts and science?" And that was one of those sentences that stood out immediately, and as we came back to it again and again, we knew was significant. So it told us that our teacher candidates had to figure out a way to justify their instructional choices for students in the classroom. Okay. Again, the sentence, why are we doing language arts and science? And then Liz was able to explain to students what she wrote here. Subjects such as language arts are carried out throughout all content areas, and that understanding the language aspect of science will greatly help you understand what you read. So that is her written reflection of how she, on the spot, explained that activity to students in the science classroom. Oops. And Frank also said that his students responded well to that morphology activity and the semantic portions of the lesson. And he said that students typically don't like vocabulary, but that for them to practice it with a careful eye on the word and the science concept together, it worked well, it was simple, and helped the students apply meaning to the terms. And he thought that that was efficacious for the students in the classroom. Okay. And we were happy with these findings. Again, it just turned out by chance that we had 3 middle grades, all in science. That was just the luck of the draw, not something that we could have planned for. But then in each case, we felt like the science concept was in charge, and that the language structures that they chose were to support the science concept and give them a better sense of the students' science learning. They understood that a focus on language would help their middle grade students reveal their science content understandings in discipline-specific ways. And important for their development as teacher candidates, they had success, and they knew that they had the capacity for integrating specific language structures in classrooms with students. It worked, and so they know that they have the power to do that more, to apply linguistics and academic language across the content areas. And so this content first approach helped them understand science first, and then the language was the support. And this is a concurrent approach to think of language as a resource for meaning making. And also, these students were in general education classrooms, so this idea of supporting their linguistic and metalinguistic understandings was important for not only for teacher candidates going into an ESOL setting, but for all of them going into all of our general education settings. And to debrief the SEA grant experience, we were really excited to do this research project with the 2 undergraduate researchers, and some lessons that we learned were that the timeline was a little bit tight for us, just in terms of the course and getting the data after the semester ended, and our undergraduates were finished on June 30th. And so that was a really compact amount of work where there was still work to be done on July 1st and even up to this point, that there was still a lot of work and writing to do, but they were kind of released from that process. And Alisa and I found that working with and mentoring undergraduate students through the research process was really helpful for us to have to make the steps of research explicit and why we do this. And that was productive for them and for us. And also we had 2 undergraduate researchers, and I think that that really helped each of them individually to be an undergraduate mini team working with us. So we had a team approach there instead of both of us with one undergraduate, not to put that student on the spot or anything. And then we developed a stronger sense of scaffolding the research process and how to be explicit about different aspects of the research and planning timeline and breaking it down and how all of these pieces of research interact. And so that is our presentation on the undergraduate SEA grant from last year.
Excellent, thank you. We have about 5 minutes if anybody has questions before Melony and Olu begin. Or comments, thoughts? All right, well, if they emerge as you're listening to Olu and Melony, we'll have some time at the end. All right, ladies, you are up. Yeah, that was important for us.
Read the book, The Language of Science from
Yes.
Halliday.
I guess, yes.
I have.
Mhm.
Do you have a slide?
Okay.
You are
I'm
first.
sorry, just,
Okay.
Go ahead and hit that, and then give us a moment to make sure we're broadcasting that. Okay?
Okay.
Just a moment. You can just keep on. All right, Prince, so this is your first time doing this, right? So I'm going to show you this. For us, we are going to go here and screen share. And we're screen sharing this PowerPoint slideshow. There you go. And then I'm going to swap back to that.
So
Sure.
Melony and Olu, once you're ready to have this camera off.
Is that showing that?
Your screen,
We're good.
say boom,
Okay, we're good.
and then a little piece
Right.
of your face. Okay.
And just let us know if you want us to broadcast you or the screen. And
We would like for the screen to be broadcasted.
we'll keep it that way. All right. No
We
problem.
can say hello.
Okay.
I think they wanted us to say hello. Are they?
Oh. Okay. So you're gonna come
Okay.
this
So
way.
hi, I'm Melony Allen. Hello, you want to come over and let them know who you are?
Yes. Hi, everyone. I'm Adefope.
All right, so we'll go to the screen. So our research was exploring student teachers' mathematical content knowledge and how that may be related to how they adapt during their teaching. So our goal, again, was to explore these connections. We really wanted to get a better understanding of the knowledge and content and teaching and how they use that knowledge to make those instructional decisions on the fly. And I think Olu and I are going to go back and forth with each slide. So our conceptual framework, if we think about effective teachers being adaptive, then them drawing on their knowledge to become adaptive. When they're adaptive, we define that as maneuvering the instruction to meet students' unique needs by recognizing and engaging what students know and understand, and engagement and trying to make real-world connections. So when teachers respond to students in those ways, we consider that being adaptive.
So what we did was extending the literature, we sort of merged these two fields. So PCK, so mathematical, pedagogical, content, knowledge, and adaptive teaching. And a lot of the prior studies did a lot of work focused on in-service teachers because they have a lot of classroom experiences, being in the class, they have a lot of teaching. And with our pre-service teachers, we have over 1,000 hours and they have quite a few opportunities to teach. So Melony and I felt that this was a really good opportunity to see or examine the mathematical PCK and also adaptive teaching. So our research question was specifically, what is the nature of pre-service teachers, mathematical, pedagogical, content, knowledge, and adaptive teaching? So what we wanted to do was really just explore what is it our pre-service teachers can do regarding mathematical knowledge and how do they use that to adapt and modify instruction. Our participants, we had a small group. The plan was for us to have a bigger group, but it just so happened that we had 7 pre-service teachers that were enrolled in student teaching, and this was last fall. So our data collection, we used an assessment called the Learning Mathematics for Teaching instrument that came out of the University of Michigan. And here I want to talk about the assessment items just to give you a sense of what these assessment items are. So with this particular question, you can see that it's asking which point is closest to 7/16 of 1/2. And that's the content piece. The pedagogical part is representing that on the number line. So looking at this question, the teacher, or when they respond, they need to understand, well, 7/16 is close to 1/2. So that is pretty much half of a half. You get a smaller portion or a smaller fractional quantity. And the right response would be A. So knowledge of content and then knowledge of teaching based off of the tool that's being used. So those are some examples. That's an example of the assessment. We also had our pre-lesson interviews, which we used to establish outcomes. So what is their plan, or what were our pre-service teachers' plans? The classroom observations, so we observed what they did and note what appeared to be a change from what we talked about regarding their lessons. And the last one is a post-lesson interview. So we use this to sort of confirm their adaptations and have them provide rationales for why they did what they did. So for the data analysis piece, our original plan was actually to analyze this learning mathematics for teaching instruments of the assessment quantitatively. We had a really small sample size, so we decided not to do that because we didn't think that the differences in mean would really reflect what was happening. And so we're going to talk about the raw scores on a slide that comes up. The pre-lesson interviews, classroom observations, and the post-lesson interviews, what we did with those were coded the adaptations and the rationales based off of the instructional decisions that our teachers made. And we assigned codes based on previous adaptive teaching.
We'll show that in just a second. So some of the previous codes that have applied to other studies for adaptive teaching are these 6 sort of ways of what teachers do when they adapt their instruction. And then these 7 rationales that are given. Now there's not one like, okay, when they modify the lesson objective, they typically are challenging and elaborating. The rationales seem to be, you have a rationale that may be for multiple adaptations.
Okay, so these are the raw scores from the Learning Mathematics for Teaching instrument. We had 7 of them in A through G, so we don't have their names to try to protect their identity. But the pre-test and the post-test, you could see that there wasn't really a lot of change. We had our first teacher who scored really well, and then teacher D also did okay. And the scores were for the most part on the lower end, with the exception of, I think, teacher F. There seems to be quite a difference. She got 6 on the pre and 2 on the post-test. But basically, they went out, they taught, and it looks like there weren't really a lot of changes in their math PCK.
So in terms of adapting and the rationales, what we found is that our teacher candidates were changing how those means, the means of which the objectives were met. So they were doing something different to stay within the objectives of the lesson. They were also creating examples or providing examples or making analogies or metaphors. Actually, I would probably say they were just really doing the examples.
Yeah.
Very little analogy and metaphor finding, but since that's all clumped in. And they rationalized that they were teaching a specific strategy or skill. Sometimes they wanted to check for student understanding, which makes sense. And they were trying to promote student engagement. Okay, so what does this look like with one of our candidates? That would tip a relatively lower score. What she did is she relied really heavily on examples. And not different examples, but the same example over and over and over. So let me show you how to add using the hundreds board. I'll do that during direct instruction and during whole group instruction. And then when you still aren't getting it during independent practice, I'm going to come over and I'm going to show you some more how to do that. And she talked about this. She says she wanted to continue to use that 100 board. I mean, that was the goal of the lesson. And she didn't want to sort of veer from that, but didn't, I should say, was not able to sort of come up with another example or another strategy to help students be able to do that. Another interesting thing that came out of her particular case is a student, let's see, she had represented the addition problem 20 plus 20, and the student brought it up in the vertical 20 plus 20. And she says, this is the pre-service teacher. I never would have thought to look at it that way until I was writing it on the board, and I wondered if anyone would set the problem up that way. And so when I saw that she did that, I wanted her to share that. So what happens is this student represents the problem a different way, and our pre-service teacher recognizes that and highlights that for the rest of the class. The rationale seems to be indicating, she wanted to recognize students, she wanted to promote this sort of engagement. And we just wonder if there were even some more robust ways that she could have done this. And again, remember, this is the teacher candidate with sort of the lower score. The other thing about this particular teacher candidate, she was in a context where we followed scripted curriculum, or we were expected to follow scripted curriculum. When asked about that, she says, it makes me want to try to move away from that math adoption, but it's hard because that's what they use. It's hard for me to make my own plans when I'm following that. It doesn't make me think as hard as I need to about what I need to be doing. It's all right there for me, which is interesting if you think about, she gives repeated examples, the same example over and over and over. It's hard to come off that script, hard. And that's kind of in line with some of the findings from previous studies on adaptive teaching as well.
Okay, so we look for patterns, as Melony said, with how they performed in the assessment and what they were doing in the classroom regarding how they adapted instruction. So teacher candidate A was the one that pretty much scored pretty high on the assessment. And the lesson, she was teaching a first grade class, and I don't know how many of you are familiar with the TENS frame. I know how many math people are in the room, so I'm just gonna briefly talk about it. So the TENS frame is basically something that we use to demonstrate addition. And the goal is, for example, let's make 10. Use the TENS frame, and you want your students to really exhaust all the possibilities. How can they make 10? If they do that, then they understand the underlying concept of addition. So while they were working on this lesson, a student with the counters represented 6 and 4 with red and yellow, and then did 4 and 6. And was like, well, they're both the same. Like, I get the same thing, it's 10. And what she did was she stopped her lesson and then she asked the student. So think about what little Johnny said. Well, she didn't say that, but I'm just saying that. Think about what this student said. Do you think that this is something that would be true for all problems? Like, if we had 17, would that property hold? And she asked the student to sort of come up with an example. So can you show me if 3 and 7 and 7 and 3 would be the same thing? And basically what she did was she moved away from her original plan to sort of focus on a fundamental principle of mathematics, which is a commutative property. And so she was able to do that. And I thought she did that effectively. For teacher candidate D, the first teacher was in a first grade class. The second one was in a fifth grade class. And in this class, the focus was on multiplication. And she used the standard algorithm, which is how a lot of us were taught how to solve a multiplication problem. She also did a lattice method, which is something that they're doing that is new in schools, and the distributive property. She found that the students weren't really challenged because they kind of know those strategies. And then she used this particular one called doubling and halving. And with this strategy is basically, so if you have 200 times 2, you double one side and then you have the other, 400 times 1. But she didn't just talk about those. She sort of gave them, so what if I had 100 times 0.75? Is this an appropriate strategy to use? What side should I have and what side should I double? And I thought that that was something that was very beautiful. And that was an adaptation. So, you know, that I thought
You
was
see
good.
the differences between our people that were representing sort of the robustness.
And the one thing I noticed though, and I don't necessarily know if I can say this is just with our pre-service teachers or just pre-service teachers in general, but they struggled with really attending to student errors and mathematical productions. I think this is an issue though. So with this particular problem, we have 43 times 26, and that's blocking. It's getting on my last nerve, sorry.
Bird says hi.
Get that off the way.
Thank you. And so here we have 848, which is obviously wrong. And here is 860, the 0 isn't there. So this is correct because 43 times 20 is 860. This row is wrong, and she wasn't really able to identify, well, what did the student do that's particularly wrong? So here, the right answer, this needs to be 258 because 40 times 6 is 240. And when you add that one group of 10, that's going to be 250. But the student instead multiplied 14 times 6, and that's how this 84 came about. So this is the error that our teacher wasn't able to pick. So even though she came up with that beautiful strategy for how they could sort of solve, this is something that she still wasn't able to do. So the problem is if we can't really, or if our pre-service teachers can't really address this kind of problem, then how are we supposed to plan to fix it? So this is definitely something that happened on a few instances. So for the most part, we saw that our pre-service teachers generally adapted, but there were limitations to how they adapted. I would say the biggest limitation was really responding to student errors based off of what I saw. So our suggestion, since we had a program evaluation grant, was opportunities to teach while enrolled in math methods. So when they're in class, they actually are in methods 2, which is our, I mean, that's their, is that a second practical? Okay. But what happens
Right
is,
before student teaching.
so they come to class and then they go out to methods 2, and so they don't see me, and then they come back and then they go back and then they come back. So what I'm saying, what I think we might want to think about as a program is perhaps a model where while we're actually in math methods course, our students are actually teaching. So maybe we go to the school site and they teach specific lessons, like if we're working on number and operations, for example, then they teach a lesson focused on that and we sort of examine what's happening there. The second thing that also Melony and I felt we needed to include here is they need opportunities to teach math at all stages in their practicum experiences. One of our students, so we actually had 8, not 7, and she was really, really strong. I had her, and she's a very powerful reasoner mathematically. Unfortunately, we weren't able to get any observations because in her student teaching, she was in an ELA classroom. And so we couldn't get anything from her.
And from a mathematical perspective, that's kind of, I don't want to say wasted, but, you know, a strong teacher in a mathematics classroom is probably a good idea.
Yeah, because she got one of the highest scores also, but we didn't include it. So I think she'll be fine in student teaching, but I do think that if we had other students that, I mean, after she finishes student teaching, that might struggle, them not getting those opportunities, I think is problematic. And the last is opportunities to teach a variety of standards-based materials. So they don't really know how to work with curriculum and curriculum materials. They really struggle with that. I kind of think that that comes from us, because in my classroom, I don't have any textbooks. Well, I guess the dean is here, so maybe you can help us there. We don't have any textbooks at all. And they have no idea. We need to do like a textbook analysis, something where they get to see reform-based materials and traditional-based materials, maybe compare it and have opportunities to see, well, what would work, what won't work, so that when they actually get out to teach, they get an understanding of, okay, I know this is a standard and this is how I can adapt this particular material to make sense of it. So those are our implications, and on that note, except Melony has
Yeah,
something to
I
add.
think we also need to work with them to sort of have the disposition to be able to push back when they encounter this scripted curriculum and sort of justify what they're doing. Instead of giving the example over and over and over of how to add with the hundreds board, you know, because it's on the curriculum, it's on the scripted curriculum. You know, this particular pre-service teacher or teacher candidate, you know, didn't feel empowered enough to be able to say, no, we're going to veer from this, you know, and the mathematical content knowledge, you know, played into that as well. So.
That's our last slide.
That's it.
Yeah, the end.
Thank you. Comments, questions, thoughts for Melony?
What does the literature say about pre-service teachers' skills in adaptive teaching? And I'm asking this because they are pre-service, then they don't even have their classrooms. Is this something developmental? I imagine an experienced teacher would be able to read what's happening in the classroom, make adaptations and carry on. Is it really expected that pre-service teachers be able to?
So previous studies, they do adapt. They adapt in very limited ways. The other thing is those studies have typically taken place in the literacy classroom. And so, or is it, you know, is it the context? Is it pre-service? I mean, we know you have experience, then you draw on those experiences to make decisions, hopefully. I mean, the answer to your question is, you know, we wouldn't expect them to probably adapt in ways as robustly as they somebody's taught several years.
Okay, so I'm just going to jump in though, because we also do work with in-service teachers, and I can comfortably say, because this is actually a lot, and this is like a huge thing coming out of a ITQ grant in Indiana. And we've worked with these teachers for like 5 years, and they still, even experienced teachers still struggle, because the knowledge you need for the different domains of knowledge. So you can have content knowledge of teaching, and you can have content knowledge students. So a lot of times the experienced teachers get the teaching piece, but they don't necessarily understand the intersections of content and students. So.
Could you speak to how, on a practical level, how much our program supports students deviating from their lesson plans in any capacity, including content?
From personal experience? That's what you want to know? Okay.
She does more supervision.
Yeah, and so, I mean, I think everybody knows I do a lot of supervision. So in my experience, having post-lesson conferences with student teachers, they are terrified to come away from their scripted lesson. they've written the lesson. I'm sitting there with a red pen, even though I try my best not to be intimidating, right? You
I don't want that in front of you, but, I agree that we don't necessarily, promote adaptive teaching in our program, but as far as scripted lessons being taught with no changes, I've done a lot of supervision, so, I can see that with standalone lessons, with unit lessons, we do expect some adaptations, even as part of their reporting of how they taught the unit. There is a certain place in the paper where they have to talk about what changes they've made in their instruction based on what needs. So there is a sense of, expectation on the adaptation, but I'm not necessarily saying that it's promoted.
It seems to be more reflecting.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, it seems like there's multiple dimensions to what you're talking about. There's to what we need to adapt. Do I need to change the ultimate goal? Do I need to change the strategy? And if the goal is to teach the number board, then maybe deviating from the number board isn't the right adaptation. If the goal is to teach addition, then deviating from the number board is. Then there's recognizing the need to adapt, and that's a certain kind of content knowledge. And then there's the time frame for adaptation. There's kind of a way where in the moment it's a high bar, and if you want that, you're gonna have to open yourself up to a lot of errors and mistakes.
That's
right.
So
And not very
extent,
comfortable
how
with
quickly
that.
do you want the adaptation to happen? Because some deep reflective judgment on how to adapt, especially for pre-service teachers, it seems like, there might be a way where you could put a premium on a slow adaptation for the pre-service teacher,
Yeah.
because you might get.
Or a robust pedagogical content knowledge, because
Yeah.
those who were adapting with robust
They had
pedagogical
a better
content knowledge.
knowledge and they were more comfortable with the content. So they felt if a student came up with something, they were able to address it. If like the one in 5th grade in the gifted class, she was very nervous. Like we sat down and did a lot of things together, but she had enough of an understanding to feel like, well, I can do this. and I know that it might throw them off a little bit.
Yeah, yeah. I really like your definition of adaptivity. It's really great.